We're good. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for joining us at Coalesce in person, and thank you to everybody who's joining us online. My name is Amos Buddy. I lead the services partnerships work with DBT Labs, and I will be the MC of the session. Very excited to introduce this next session with some interesting characters behind me. It is entitled Back to the Future, where dimensional modeling enters the modern data stack. And we will have, leading the session, Tony Dolliger, Managing Director at Analytics 8, and John Barczewski, Senior Consultant and DBT Practice Lead at Analytics 8. All of the chat conversation and Q&A is going to take place in the DBT community Slack at #Coalesce Back to the Future. This will allow you to connect with folks online, and it will be a place where everyone, and speakers included, can answer questions and continue the conversation after the session. Let's see what else. Let's just get into it. Let's get started. Over to you, Tony and John.
Awesome. Thank you, Amos. Welcome, everyone. This is a workshop, so the way you will engage in this workshop is by participating in the Slack channel coalesce-back-to-the-future. We have two lovely chat moderators in the room, Abu and Jake. They will be here to help moderate the chat, but what you'll see is we'll actually have opportunities for engagement where we would like you to actually answer those questions, if you feel comfortable, into the Slack channel. Obviously, any questions or comments can also go into Slack, and if you're online now or in the future, you can also engage in the Slack channel, and we'll be watching it in the weeks to come as well. Cool. Oh, I'm Tony Doc Brown Dolliger. This is John Marty McFly Barczewski. And we are from Analytics 8. Analytics 8 is a data and analytics consultancy. We are a DBT partner, and we are very excited to be here with you all today, talking about something that we feel is a very relevant topic. So I'll start off by saying we love DBT. It's been an amazing journey for us as a consultancy, and watching DBT grow and impact the organizations that we work with and that we kind of watch in the community, mostly because of how it enables people to participate in the data processes that previously were inaccessible to them, right? It's amazing to find people who talk as analytics engineers like, I used to be in finance and work with spreadsheets, or I was a BI person and now all of a sudden I can do data engineering tasks, all because overnight they developed these superpowers through this amazing technology that we now know and love, DBT. Those new superpowers enable people to answer business questions, provide data to different analytics-ready consumption methods, variously, that usually you'd have to wait weeks or months to be able to answer, both either because the data teams were more productive or because you as an analyst could use DBT to answer those questions yourself. And as newly minted analytics engineers with your newly minted superpowers, you solve problems in the way that we would expect you to, not necessarily through very complex relational data structures, but one big table, like it was a spreadsheet, like the way you were used to working before. Very natural evolution in terms of what you'd be creating and how you'd be most naturally interacting with the consumption layers that you would create in DBT. So OBAT, one big table. Not sure how the A got in there. Just kidding. But what these overnight superheroes found, one big table, actually is many big tables. And sometimes you found that the same data elements lived in multiple places within these different data sets. And it became increasingly difficult to be able to maintain pipelines to make sure that you're having governance or consistent definitions of those entities. And so you had to have, this was a problem basically that, I mean, is as old as we've been doing this analytics thing, but people who previously had not been exposed to different modeling concepts found themselves with challenges that have been around for a while. But lots of helpful ink was spilled in the DBT community to try to address this problem, right? Because people are basically saying There has to be a better, more efficient way to do this. So people wrote blogs, gave wonderful talks at prior Coalesce sessions, engaged in Slack to try to help people find ways to create the foundational objects in your data models to underpin the layers where people actually are going to consume data for reports, dashboards, or other types of consumption methods. And the concept of modularity became increasingly important. Analytics engineers were asking the question, what's the best way for me to achieve modularity in my DBT data models? If you ask that question, there's a lot of different places you can look. Some people turn to books, new and old, and I'm guessing we're left incredibly confused if you actually spent time to read the hundreds of pages that are spilled on this topic. Because what you'll find is people talk about these things and say incredibly different things about the best way to model your data. In each book, you'll find slight variations, contradictions, or completely diametrically opposed ideas, calling the other ideas absurd and guaranteed paths to failure. Not helpful. Some even wrote new books to address the challenges, which is helpful. Even within our social discourses, those disagreements continued. More confusion, more buzzwords, new ideas, more ideas, the way to do it. We've called a lot of things dead along the way online, which is always fun. Those are my favorite blogs. And this kind of came to a head at the 2020 Coalesce session when Dave Fowler talked in a very helpful way to calm the nerves of analytics engineers, to say, if you're doing one big table, you're okay. It's okay. You are making life easier for the people who are using the DBT models. You're not wrong for doing one big table. He also suggested some of the popular ways that we used to think about modeling data in the past were doing more harm than good because of technological advancements that have made things that were written 12, 15, 20 years ago irrelevant and potentially confusing people and slowing down the productivity of data teams. Dave Fowler, I don't know him, I shouldn't say like Dave, helpfully acknowledged too, right? There's a benefit though still to modularity. He said this in the talk, which you should go watch. It's a very good talk. It's a very highly watched talk too. Suggested a data warehouse would be helpful to actually construct before you create those multiple wide tables as a way to build in modularity, standardization, governance into your DBT models, confirming, yes, modularity is important, good. But he didn't go into incredible detail about what the data warehouse that they built looked like or how they did it. And I get it. It was just a 20-minute talk. That wasn't the point of the talk, right? It was to stimulate discussion, to incrementally advance the community, help people get outside of the box of the way that they've been thinking about things. So what's fun about the modern data stack is the data warehouse is no longer necessarily something physical, but actually a concept, potentially a layer in your data lifecycle as it moves through from the journey of raw sources into knowledge. We were left with no doubt, though, that whatever he was talking about data modeling, it was definitely not Kimball nor dimensional modeling. So, many are left wondering, if not Kimball, then how do you do that whole data warehouse thing in the modern data stack? It's a fair question. And what's funny to me, this has really been the conversation all along. How do we actually build that data warehouse thing? Not necessarily, to me, the one big table approach. Because if you pay attention to how Kimball talked about data marts, those sounded more like denormalized constructs as ways to consume data within the data warehouse. Flattening a table into one big table may have sounded like an extreme end to that concept. But Kimball, ironically, was the one arguing for more denormalization 10, 15 years ago compared to his very normalized ER Inman crowd, right? And I don't know if he would find it funny to be the one like arguing for a little bit more normalization, like everybody chill out a little bit, compared to where he was arguing for denormalization. But we got to recognize the trends in industry of technology are going to force us, or should force us, to reconsider the things that we've done in the past to incrementally drive value to the business, right? It's a good thing for people like Dave Fowler to challenge assumptions that we have to try to find ways to improve what we're doing. I would argue too, though, there's value in knowing where we came from as well and how we got here so we don't repeat mistakes of the past. So why are we here, John and I? Ultimately, our goal today is to try to present to you in this workshop format why we believe dimensional modeling is still relevant in the modern data stack from a pro-dimensional modeling perspective. Analytics 8 as a company has been doing this for almost 20 years now with various different customers and various different ways of actually going through the dimensional modeling process. I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. But when you hear dimensional modeling conversations, it's not always from a pro-dimensional modeling perspective. So sometimes it feels like it's a biased positioning of dimensional modeling. So what we're going to do is say, what parts have we seen drive value for our customers when we talk about dimensional modeling, especially in the modern data stack? And look, this is heavy. I get it. Some of you have a lot of emotions about this, mostly because you've been on failed projects, potentially. You've seen things not go well. You've seen things called dimensional modeling that may or may not be dimensional modeling that might have actually caused a lot of stress in your life. Or you're fearful if you're not doing this, am I going to box myself into a situation where I need to recreate what I've done and potentially create risk in my job, right? You have a fear of not getting it right. I don't want you to feel that way. We kind of dressed up like idiots today. Well, I did. You look perfectly normal.
Speak for yourself.
Yes. The hair thing is really messing with me. I don't have hair. It's not a shock. Everybody's like, whoa. It's in my eyes. It's been a while since I've had hair in my eyes. It's a beautiful day today, everybody. What we want to do is basically do the same thing Dave Fowler did, just in the opposite direction, which seems counterproductive, but we want to incrementally move folks back towards thinking maybe this whole dimensional modeling thing isn't actually harmful. There may be a way to be successful with this approach, even though we need to evolve our way of thinking about it. And let's be honest anyway, there's a million ways to model data. It seems to be entirely subjective often in data modeling for analytics. But what we do know is there's value in learning from those who've come before us and learned lessons the hard way or had successes. But because technology evolves, data evolves, we do need to figure out what do we keep, what do we throw away. So today, we're here to say, let's go back to the future and see if we can try to untangle this whole dimensional modeling thing. So the first thing we want you to contemplate in your lovely mobile devices / laptops in the Slack channel, does this match your experience as an analytics engineer or not? When I'm describing the problem statements that you have, especially those coming from non-traditional backgrounds, does this mirror your experience or not? What's your current perspective? Maybe don't write a whole paragraph right out away on that, but maybe think about that one. And understand personally, are you resistant to this message or not? That can be helpful, right? Again, my objective today is not to tell you you need to blow up everything you're doing in DBT, recreate it from scratch. All I'm trying to do is point out things that we've found to be valuable through the dimensional modeling process that might add value incrementally to what you're doing today. So engage with us in Slack. What time does the party start? Right after this. Which is also why we dressed up, because I was like, who's going to come to the 5 o'clock session before the kickoff party if we don't dress up? So thank you for being here. Appreciate it. So, acknowledging some of you have no idea what we're talking about. Dimensional modeling, what is this guy saying? Maybe not. Here's some common misconceptions about dimensional modeling. First, dimensional modeling is just one part of the business dimensional life cycle that Ralph Kimball developed to actually design data warehouses. It's not the whole thing. It's just one part. Second, dimensional modeling fundamentally is a collaborative process. It's a process. It does not equal your code. It's a process. The point of it is to connect the needs of the business with the realities of the underlying source data. That's how Kimball wrote about this. I love that sentence, the realities of your source data. It's like some of you are like, preach, yes, it is real. The realities of our source data connected to the business needs. According to the lore that I've read, which I will acknowledge, I think it's accurate. I did not personally talk to Mr. Kimball, but it's my understanding he didn't actually invent dimensional modeling, he discovered it in the wild. I think that's incredibly important. What he found was when people positioned data in the language of the business, it naturally showed up physically in these different tables and structures and databases as these things like dimensional models. There is some information also that talks about how the terms dimension and fact actually predate relational databases. This is fundamentally more than just physical table structures, especially just DBT coding models, right? Dimensional modeling first primarily aims to model the business rather than modeling relationships amongst data entities. Modeling the business, very important. So we'll hear things all the time about why you shouldn't do dimensional modeling, right? We don't have time to wait for that, just get it done. Okay, I don't think anybody's thinking like that's always the best approach, but sometimes it is definitely the right approach. Just get it done. It needs to be done, get it done. Dimensional modeling is way too complicated, it's going to slow things down. Secondly, you need people that actually know how to do this. Nobody under the age of 70 knows how to do this anymore. Fair? Maybe. Dimensional models make work harder for BI analysts. Most tools don't actually accept dimensional formats anyway. There's some that we work with where it'll literally break if you put a dimensional model into it. So that's not helpful. And my favorite one, get out of the 90s, bro. Technology's evolved. So I couldn't find this contraption to wear today. I would have if I could have. There's still value, we think, in the foundational elements, the process of dimensional data modeling, and we think it's worth looking a little bit kooky today to argue for the validity of that. So is dimensional modeling relevant in the modern data stack? Yes. Spoiler alert. Right there in that little thing called a warehouse that Dave Fowler talked about. But let's not go there yet. Like I said, dimensional modeling is not the same thing, or data modeling even, is not the same thing as the models you create in DBT. Dimensional modeling is more than your models. It's an older term than DBT. Again, might be shocking to some of you. Hopefully not. It applies more broadly just to how we use it in analytics. Data modeling is more than just for analytics. You can engage in dimensional modeling without ever writing a single line of code. That's cool. And importantly, for those of you that know, your logical models never have to match your physical models. Is there value in that sometimes? Yeah, for sure. You're not constrained to that assumption, though. Mr. Steve Hoberman, I got to meet him at Data Modeling Zone Conference in Madison, Wisconsin. It was a wonderful event. He was a very nice gentleman. I bought his book, Data Modeling Made Simple. Blew my mind. Very cool way to say this. Conceptual data models, more broadly than analytics, when we say a conceptual data model, what we actually mean is the business need within a defined scope. We're describing the business need, not code. Logical, the detailed business solution. This is where some people go wrong. They think the logical model is the technical solution. No. Still the detailed business solution. When we get to the physical, that's where we actually talk about the technical solution. So before we try to argue like surrogate keys or whatever, let's talk about the conceptual and logical value of data modeling dimensionally first. Okay? Fair? Everybody's blood pressure just, we're okay? All right. I look ridiculous. You can't take me that seriously and get mad, you know what I mean? So, helpfully, it's helpful to think, when you're thinking about how to solve a problem in DBT today, what is your model design bias? When you receive requests, does it sound like, hey, can you integrate this new data table that we created in this one-off source system that nobody knows how to connect to? And you think, gosh, I'm going to get that data in there. You're biased, right? Your first thought, do I think about the data source? Or do you think about the report requests that you get, or the KPI requests or metric requests you get? Profitability by quarter, I need it tomorrow. What's the place your mind goes to first when you think about how to model something? Lawrence Core writes about this in Agile Data Warehouse Design, kind of putting it on a spectrum, right? The term data warehouse is unhelpful because it's ambiguous. It can mean lots of different things. I've heard a lot of things called data warehouse. Very few have been dimensional. They look like something else a lot of times. That's because there's two very different ways. I mean, there's a million different ways to do data warehouse, but fundamentally two where we see this structure, where you're either thinking about things from a supply perspective, the data first, the entities, relationships between the data, or you're thinking about things more from a demand perspective, the report requirements that you get. Now, here's where dimensional modeling can be really helpful, regardless of how you make physical models. Let's say you get a report request from a business user. They want to see revenue by customer over time. Let's exclude these product types, because of course you have to exclude things in data. Let's exclude this company division that we just divested, right? You get all kinds of different weird things. When you think about how do you get that request, there's a temptation to want to overfit your model to the report request that you get. Build a DBT model exactly for the report that you're going to have. We know that's bad. We'll talk about that in a second. But we'll filter out those values, we'll aggregate to some level of detail that they want, and we'll only model the columns that they request. Dimensional modeling has a fundamentally different way of thinking about how to solve, or think about how you would solve this problem. Even more fundamentally, how you would understand the business problem actually being asked to you. Dimensional modeling is the way to conceptualize data requests, analytics requests, in business terms. We're not talking about technology yet. We're trying to describe the business problem, the business solution. When we apply dimensional modeling concepts, we do so conceptually first, logically second, not the physical models right away in DBT. So again, we're trying to think about how to translate and transform raw data into this connective fabric of what we call business processes, business events, and business attributes. So, 4-step process of dimensional modeling, still no code. First, you need to identify the business process behind the request that you get. You get a question about revenue. For many of the organizations you work with, revenue is a higher level metric that actually represents metrics, sub-metrics, within multiple different business processes. Right? Business processes are a series of events that generate data in an organization more often than not. It's very helpful to break down your higher level metric that you're getting, the requests that you're getting for information, knowledge, into the component parts. So dimensional modeling says identify the business processes first and name them accordingly. Be specific. Don't say sales or marketing. Be specific. E-commerce transactions, brick and mortar point of sale transactions. Two different processes, right? How a customer engages with you, the type of data it creates, two different processes. There could be off-the-wall stuff like warranty subscriptions, which people forget about, and you're like, where's all the warranty data? Oh, oops, my bad. First step is to model the business process. Second step is to identify and name the detail of those business processes. I'm not saying the data, the business process. Think about the unique event, the lowest level event that generates data for those business processes. So e-commerce transactions, maybe that's somebody adding an item to an online cart, right? For a brick and mortar point of sale, maybe that's the beep at the cash register. Beep. Warranty subscriptions, maybe it's like somebody actually filling an order for this. Identify, Kimball calls it the grain, but it's the event that creates data. Third step is to identify the attributes that you're actually capturing to that business process, like what's the information available at that point in time when you're doing that activity. And what you'll find is, often, those business processes are capturing data that overlaps. Super cool. You write that out. When you show this to a business leader, somebody who's not familiar with code or technology, they look at this and they go, yeah, that's our business. Cool. What's neat about that, you can break down those incremental pieces now into things that you can deliver to the business, incremental value. Very important, right? If you were to try to do all of this at once and deliver revenue as a single packaged item to somebody, you're going to wait a little bit longer than if you built each component incrementally, tested it incrementally, delivered value incrementally to the business. And inevitably, the next question you get when they say revenue is, how much of that's e-commerce transactions versus other stuff? Right? So you already have the detail now available to you and thinking about the business processes that you're delivering value. Whether or not your physical model matches that, it's still helpful to think about things in these terms conceptually and logically as you're delivering value. So with your conceptual and logical dimensional models in hand, what do you have? You have a plan to deliver value incrementally. You have a more complete understanding of business concepts and requirements. That's cool. Soapbox. The most value you can provide to your organizations is truly understanding the business behind the data. What does the business need? How does the business operate? By engaging in this activity, you can help the business understand itself, uncover assumptions that people are making that may be incorrect. When I would do this with customers, I'd be drawing out like conceptual models, and I just would read the cardinality left and right. Does a shipment always have an order? Somebody would say, yeah, always. And somebody here would go, hold on, buddy. Not always, right? And people are learning things in the room just by going through this process, right? There's a lot of value there. You tease out further requirements that might have been missed just by somebody flying in 100 miles an hour and then leaving, saying, I need this tomorrow, go. And you identify future opportunities to be able to do analysis. Pretty cool stuff. So again, dimensional modeling is the way to conceptualize the requests you get for data in business terms. So if we make the connection, there's your animation. Do you mostly get requests from your business folks or your data consumers, not always business, but data consumers, from a supply perspective or a demand perspective, right? Supply is, I need to integrate this new data, or are they coming to you with particular requests from a demand perspective? I need this thing in this way. What are some of the models that you maybe have overfit in your process for DBT to particular report requests, or the other way, underfit, and just kind of pass through the sins of the model of the operating system into the rest of your DBT models, right? Is there a way you could deconstruct those things into business processes instead, logically, so you understand the concepts? And what time does that party start? Soon. Soon. Now, engage in Slack, remember. Abu and Jake are here to take all of your arguments, so we don't have to. No, I'm just kidding. If you disagree, it's okay with us. That's good. Now, I do think there is value then sometimes in taking your logical models and having your physical models reflect those logical models. Again, let's set aside all of the other stuff that Kimball tends to like fire people up about, but like kind of making your models look like your logical models. And John's going to be here to talk about specifically how that works in DBT and the success we've had with that too.
Your turn to stand there.
Less time. Everybody's like, get that guy off the stage.
Okay, so dimensional modeling is one way to create a dry environment. And I think many of us in the DBT community are pretty familiar with this phrase. It means don't repeat yourself. So on the contrary, we have a wet environment, write everything twice. So when you design architecture for requirements today, what it really means is that you're risking your future. And if you've seen Back to the Future, that's something you don't want to do. If we haven't made it clear by now, a primary advantage of dimensional modeling is conformed dimensions. So a very easy example that comes to my mind is if you had 3 facts and maybe 1 customer dimension, and you have to make an update to that dimension, you only have to do it in 1 spot. I've seen plenty of projects where you go staging to Mart, and boom, you have to make the same change in 3 different spots. So that's a simple example, but another point I want to go to that we've been talking a lot about is when you're modeling for a specific source, it's creating unnecessary technical debt. I've had so many projects where the business already understands what you've built, and it becomes a pain to move off of that. It's unbelievable. So the business trusts it, and then when you get a new source, you either need to retrace all of your steps or tear everything down and build something net new. So if you can think about integrating 10, 12, 20 sources, you can see the hole that you dig yourself into. This is how I typically see environments that were once dry become wet. So what does this mean? Does this mean I should spend weeks up front designing a Kimball data warehouse? Absolutely not. So what we recommend is having a systematic approach in place to set up sound structure for your modeling, and we want you to move fast. So I've seen so many people completely dismiss dimensional modeling because they don't want to put the time in to learn it, and that's fair of me to say because that's how I felt 2 years ago. I found myself in the beginning, when I started my job, I read the entire Kimball book and nothing resonated with me. But as time went on, I've done dozens of projects, solved tons of problems, and I kept opening the Kimball book. I'm like, oh, they've done this before. There's something I can pull in. I'm not saying everything's relevant there, but it's a useful resource. So I think we live in an era where people are just throwing money around to solve their problems. But the fact of the matter is you need a solid strategy in place. So my challenge to you is next time you're modeling, look at a modeling book. It's not that hard. Get Kimball, get star schema, and see what you can do. And then while you're working, use the power of your data warehouse. Work agile. Like, you're not going to figure out all these edge cases when you're developing, or when you're planning it out. You're going to figure them out when you're developing. So move fast and use your structure as a foundation when you start development. Where does this get us? So when you take a holistic approach that looks at a business process, it means you have a much better opportunity at delivering incremental value. We like to think of business processes as the lowest grain. We already said that earlier, but by modeling in these terms, we can tackle each piece as separate tasks. You don't need to do everything in advance, and this helps create a modular structure and opens many doors because we have all these models at different grains that serve as building blocks for our architecture. Going off this, we want to balance modularity and performance while building our architecture. So the purpose of this is to help us logically design architecture that will work for the future. You can and you should build another layer meant for data consumption. So what would this look like? This could be one big table or aggregations in a mart where you create your KPIs, but the goal here is to achieve maximum flexibility, reusability, and consistency. We understand that storage is cheap, and we still think you should take advantage of that. So for many data teams, the primary goal is optimizing ease of use for a BI analyst. By modeling a data warehouse dimensionally, are we abandoning this? And the answer is no. This is not an either-or question. You should be doing both. The important part of modeling is having a purposeful design, keeping the business in mind. You don't need to pick between denormalized and normalized structure, and there should be this balance I keep referring to: usability, performance, and modularity. Without building modular structure, the logic often becomes one-dimensional as you scale. So, as everyone's aware, most companies today, for their BI pipelines, are on a batch schedule, so like maybe a nightly refresh or something. A portion of the give and take I'm referring to is having a separate intermediate layer dedicated to a data model, not just skipping to a mart. If you skip that, you lose visibility into your tables and you run into issues when you scale. So the reason you're on a modern cloud data platform is to build something that will last you in the future. And as Doc would say, if you're going to build a data warehouse, why not build it with some style? All right, let's make the connection here. Ask yourself. Get on Slack. Do I have any wet pipelines that I need to make dry? Could I build modular components from a business process perspective? And lastly, we are approaching happy hour. When does the party start?
I almost sent John to the grocery store to buy like a bunch of mini bottles. Be like, right now. But we didn't. Sorry. Yeah. I nailed it, right? Yeah, the face. I can't wait for that to be an emoji with our Analytics 8 Slack. That's going to be awesome. All right. To wrap up, very importantly, dimensional modeling has been part of this seemingly never-ending debate. How do I build a data warehouse? We often say Kimball, right? Ralph's retired, very retired. I'm trying to decide. Yeah, okay, I'll say it. We reached out to him, not for this, for something else, and somebody from his team responded back like, he has no interest in talking about this. So he's like, congrats, man, you made it. You're done. You're done. But some things I really liked about reading Ralph's writings, which go back so far. I read one from '97 this week. That was fun. He always validated approaches, like ER, for example, or Inman's approaches, for where they added value, but always held user stakeholders in the highest position when we're talking about data designs for decision-making applications. I will say, so again, things are subjective. Like, part of the joke of consultants is like every answer to every question is it depends. But it's true, right? Like, don't just blindly go into something. You need to make sure you understand the business reasons why you're designing things architecturally. But I do believe, because he did in the 2010s, I do believe he would have modernized and contextualized his arguments had he not retired. He's not chiming in now, though. What's funny to me, though, is many of the counter-arguments that we find, at least conceptually, are the same ones that he wrote in that white paper back in '97. He was responding to these arguments. They haven't really changed dramatically, even if the technology has changed. So we're left to try to think from his primary principles. I have no way of knowing this, but I kind of have this feeling that Ralph would have really liked DBT. Again, Mr. Kimball. I don't know Ralph. Why am I saying Ralph? He's an old friend. No. I think he would have liked DBT a lot, mostly because he focused first on understanding the needs of the business, the realities in the data, and delivering incremental value to the business, and how that's not in competition with DBT's mission at all. We heard this morning, right? It's on a mission to empower data practitioners to create and disseminate organizational knowledge. Organizational knowledge can create business value. It's what the needs of the business are to actually generate value from that knowledge. They're not in competition, they're in harmony. It's just a technology, it's how you use it. I don't think Dave Fowler's here. If he is, he can come up, we can talk, I don't know. Kimball accepted the reality and the benefits of data marts and flattening, right? It's not in competition with what Dave Fowler's arguments were for flattening tables for consumption, at least not conceptually. That's always been the case for Kimball's assumptions. Data marts, aggregations, further denormalization for particular needs, so long as they were supplied by the foundational elements of conformed dimensions, so the connective fabric that sits underneath that one big table layer as being really important. And he would argue, as we would argue, oftentimes it's helpful to have your logical models when you're thinking about modular design to reflect business process in anticipation of future questions you're going to get from the business, right? So that's your business process-oriented fact tables connected by dimensions for that to create that modularity. The question is always, how much should you normalize your warehouse? We didn't get to hear Dave Fowler's opinion on this. I can assume what it was. The question I want for you to consider is, right, what's the right amount of normalization or denormalization in your dry modular components that you're building within your conceptual data warehouse? That's so many jargon, but I hope it's clear after this. Right, before the one big tables, how much normalization should you actually do? And it's always been the debate. debate hasn't really changed, even though we've moved beyond it, technological advancements. So we're arguing a dimensional-esque model is the right way to think about your warehouse layer. That does not mean that every technical contextualization that Kimball had for the technology at the time is still relevant physically, necessarily, within the technologies used today. But it does mean that you should be thinking about things through the lens of the business, regardless. No matter how you do technological implementations, you, as a data practitioner, are going to derive way more value for the organizations you work with, and for yourself professionally and your growth too, by thinking about things from other people's perspective, mostly the business user's perspective. It's a form of empathy, maybe. Again, I think it would be funny that Kimball be on the more normalized side today in some of these arguments, but I don't really think that's the case. I think he's actually arguing for more denormalization in the warehouse than some of the folks are today in how they would build out that normalized warehouse layer. So to that end, I don't believe we're doing more harm than good by forcing all of our consultants who are watching online to read the Kimball book before they dive into their projects. To consider dimensional modeling, I think, is valuable. If for nothing else, you stand on the shoulders of giants from the industry examples of how to structure and solve some of these problems. One of the things I love about this is when we work with customers from all different backgrounds, we can go to the Kimball book and look up financial services and anticipate, here's the 6 data problems they're probably going to have, and here's 12 solutions to those problems. We need to figure out what's the best way to implement this for this customer. Very little of that is about technical implementation. They're logical models that are in there to be able to understand the business from a data practitioner's point of view. That alone is helpful in this book. And again, can add value to your own organizational knowledge and functional area knowledge in your career. So where do we go from here, other than the future? It's getting old, I can tell. Happy hour's right around the corner. Key takeaways. It's helpful to create conceptual and logical data models, particularly from a business process and business event lens. Understand how data is being created. How is data being created? What data is available to collect at that point where it's collected? Do not model solely from report requirements. Let the report requirements drive you to the lower level understanding of business process and business events. Consider dimensional modeling as a framework that you could make your models more dry with. Just run it through the lens and see if it makes sense for you. There's a lot of questions I know that'll come up about this, like, what about slowly changing dimensions? We don't have time today. I think, okay, I was debating whether or not I stay in costume. This is a costume. But I was like, I think it'll be really easy to find me at the party for you to be like, you're so wrong, if I'm staying in this. So I'll at least hang out for a while dressed up like this so you can find me real easily. And the third point, most importantly, consider not abandoning dimensional modeling entirely in your growth and your knowledge and development as a data practitioner. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, if you're online, if you have any questions, or if you're in the room and you have questions, please engage with us on the Slack channel. If you're an introvert, come talk to me. If you're an extrovert, we would love to have a conversation with you all. If you have anything positive or negative to say, love it. Love feedback. Love to have the dialogue and conversation. And I've really enjoyed the conversations we've had with you all at the conference. I hope you have a great conference the rest of the way as well. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks again to Tony and John. And first of all, just raise of hands of those in the room. Should Tony and John stay in their costumes tonight?
That's not even a thing for him.
Okay. I'll stay in my costume too. I think the party starts at 6 in the foyer. Do you want to hang for questions? Okay. Any questions in the room? Okay, you're going to hang over there for questions. Okay, questions in the lobby and on the Slack. Thank you again, everyone who attended, and thanks to everyone who's online in attendance. There was a really good conversation going on in the Slack, too. You missed it, but come check it out later. It's really good. All right, thanks, everyone. See you tomorrow.